All right. Well, excited to have Ben today here to chat with us. So, Ben, you're a principal here at Cicero. We're going to talk a little bit about brand and higher education. That's your specialty. Really excited about this. So, let's hop right in. Tell us a little bit about your background, your role here at Cicero.
Okay. I've been at Cicero for 7 years. Before that, I was at another consulting firm for about 5 years where I did mostly process optimization work in the oil and gas sector.
Quite different.
Yes,
Yeah.
took me to some far off places, had some adventures, quite different than what I do here at Cicero. But quickly at Cicero, in about my first year, I fell into the higher education practice. Loved it. Always been passionate about higher education and interested in the way those institutions operate. So yeah, I've really doubled down on the higher ed specialty and helped to build our higher education practice here. And I do not all of my work in higher ed, but most, and it's been that way for several years now.
Well, I know that so you work with Aaron Anderson here at the firm quite a bit, and I know the two of you together just drive massive impact for the institutions that we work with across the country. And so, on that topic of higher education and thinking about how higher education institutions can kind of get ahead or think about having a specific niche and advantage within areas that they're trying to target. We're going to talk about brand and brand management a little bit. So let's start there. Many people maybe don't consider how much institutions of higher education focus on brand and need to build brand in order to build students and their pipeline. So what's kind of new in this space? Let's talk about it a little bit, and what kind of work you've been doing with brand.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's for most folks, it probably doesn't occur to them that institutions do care a lot about and focus on brand. And many people don't realize that they themselves have associations with a college or university and think of a brand that they tie to an institution. But it's a very real thing. It exists. It's not new. There are a lot of folks at institutions on the academic side that don't think much about brand, don't want to, but it's real and it's important. There's a lot of competition out there between institutions. There's a finite number of students, and there are more options than ever now. Non-traditional options or alternatives to post-secondary education. So colleges and universities care a lot about and need to manage their brand to appeal to students and retain students. That's really important for them.
So Ben, how do you, when you're working with a higher education client, how do you define brand for these clients? I mean, it is very similar to private sector, company that's offering products and trying to market and build market share, but it's probably quite a bit different for higher education. How do you define brand for these institutions?
Yeah, so I think the parameters are a little different. Institutions typically come to us being very aware of what their brand is or is not, or more often than not, they come to us looking for help in the form of research to inform brand building or rebranding or decisions they're going to make around marketing their brand generally. So yeah, every institution will have a marketing department. Some more robust and maybe more sophisticated than others. But the things an institution thinks about in terms of brand are not dissimilar from the things that you and I or others might think. Like, okay, think of colleges and universities in your area. Words that come to mind might be commuter school,
Mm.
party school,
Yeah,
great engineering program at that school,
right.
really selective, really expensive, very inexpensive and or practical, really flexible. Like these are things that we associate with a college or university. And not everybody has the exact same associations, but we kind of put them in boxes in our mind, like this institution does this thing and this one does this thing, and it's a mix of different things that they do, and it could be anything from price to perceived pedigree or selectivity, or it could be a program or a couple of programs that a college is really well known for, and all of that goes into their brand and the way people think about them and the way prospective students or parents of prospective students, if we're talking about young traditional age students. It feeds into the way that folks do or do not consider attending an institution or applying, or just the way they think about those generally. So every institution does have a brand and things that it represents to folks, or maybe does well or doesn't do well. And a lot of it's perception and not quite so objective.
Right.
But all of that exists and plays into an institution's success and the number of applications they're getting and students they're enrolling, and that's really important now. There are existential forces at play here. A lot of folks, even outside of higher education at this point, have probably heard about the demographic cliff, which is just a lower number of graduating high school students. It's just a population trend that we have here in the United States and really throughout the Western world. But it's very real. If you lose a percentage point in graduating high school seniors over a few years, that's a huge impact on higher education.
So talk a little bit about so you mentioned often clients will come to us to help support the research that influences what they do with a brand. What are some trends that maybe you're seeing coming out of some recent engagements and research? What's just some food for thought that you're seeing very relevant right now for clients?
One thing that is kind of outside of clients and what they can control maybe is there's a movement in the last 10 years plus, really, that seems more palpable than it has before, about just questioning the value of higher education. There's more pressure there than there has been before. You hear a lot of folks in political circles and elsewhere questioning the ROI that you get from a traditional post-secondary education, a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
You know, folks say things like, well, we don't need that anymore. Let's just get a few certificates into people's hands, job skills, and then they can go to work, and they don't need to go spend 4 years in college or more, or even 2 years. And not that that's wrong, but we're hearing more of that, and students seem to be considering that as a viable alternative to college more than they have before. So that just puts pressure on institutions to get their message out, to market and message their value to attract students so that they can keep their doors open and keep doing what they're doing.
So that challenge that these universities are facing of increasing their enrollment and looking closer at their branding and really scrutinizing it, I think can be really challenging. What are maybe some first lenses that we look through to help evaluate and learn more about the perception that a university may have?
So often the primary research we conduct to go do what we would call a brand study, loosely, there are different versions of this, but a brand study would be interviewing maybe focus groups or a quantitative research online survey of prospective students, parents of prospective students, current students, alumni, to see how they're thinking about higher ed, what they want from an institution of higher education. And that there's value in understanding that generally, but typically we try to focus in on likely students. So every institution has kind of a known area from which they're going to pull students. And if for the example...
Like geographic area.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah.
for this example, that's where I was going. Institutions have a geography. Some institutions it's quite large, others it's quite small. Like they're, a commuter campus is pulling from 20, 30 miles in each direction, and that's where maybe 90% of their students come from. So there's a geography, or there's a set of programs that an institution offers, and they know that those are their prospective students. So there's a lot of value in asking those prospective students what it is they want out of college. What are the most important factors to them? Is it cost? Is it community? Is it the college experience? Is it a specific program? And for different types of institutions and their constituent student pool or prospective student pool, the answers to those questions can be quite different. So Institution type A in City 1 might need to focus on very different things than institution type B in City 2
Yeah.
in order to be successful. And the competitive landscape for each college or university will be quite different. A lot of it is based on, well, what other institutions are down the street from us? What are they good at? What do people associate with them or go to them for? Therefore, what is the niche that we can fill? So that's been a pretty big focus of our brand research with institutions the last few years. There's a concept that gets floated around a little bit, or a saying in higher education, that there's a sea of sameness.
Okay.
Meaning a lot of institutions, if you think of your run-of-the-mill public colleges and universities, a lot of them say mostly the same things in their public-facing collateral and what they're doing, and a lot of those institutions over the last few decades have expanded their programs in a way that it seems as though they're trying to be everything to everyone, which is really difficult because then folks can't tell the difference. And it's hard for those types of institutions to keep costs down if they're trying to be everything to everyone and maintain all sorts of programs. Mm-hmm. Cost is always a factor. It's always been important, always will be. It's always a top 2 or 3 factor for pretty much every institution. There are a select few that are the outliers that we can think of that are where cost doesn't matter nearly as much because they just have brand prowess that is very unique. But those institutions are very few and far between, and out of reach for most students. So we spend a lot of time working with institutions to try to carve out a unique brand identity to communicate, hey, we're going to do this thing and this thing and this thing, and leave these other few things to the side, or really de-emphasize them, because we cannot be everything to everybody. And institutions that have had more success in recent years, for the most part, are those that have maybe narrowed the aperture of what they're trying to be and for whom they're trying to be those things.
And that's what I think, something that came up as I was thinking about what you were saying on maybe the type of work that we've done to help these institutions either narrow or expand. They may say, hey, I feel like we can really offer a robust online system that will reach multiple states, or helping to define that vision somewhat. I think that it could be difficult for many institutions to know how to take that step to understand it. And it sounds like some of the research that we've done can help navigate what would be a very complicated branding process, right?
Yes. So once you're armed with the good data, it's easier to make some of those tough decisions about what to focus on versus de-emphasize. Or in some cases, our research leads to an expansion of some sort. We just wrapped up a project with an institution that is expanding to a mostly online program in an area where they have not offered that before. So the question was, is this viable? How big is the market for this? How many students might we attract? To what extent does our brand play into the viability of this program? And to what extent might this new online program cannibalize our existing in-person program and those students? And once armed with data, they will be, this is very recent, they will be able to make informed decisions about what they want to do, and hopefully understand directionally what the implications are going to be, instead of just finger to the wind saying like, yeah, well, let's start a new program and we think it'll be successful.
Yeah, I think that universities are really trying to be very strategic with what they're doing, where probably for a long time it was, let's just expand. There's just a lot of opportunity to educate across myriad programs. And now I think because of the competitiveness, like you're saying, they need to carve out specificity somewhat in order to remain competitive and keep students interested in their pipeline. So Ben, I guess we're coming up on our time. It's really interesting to talk about this because it's really complicated. What would be maybe if you're in a marketing department at a university currently, and they came to you and they said, hey, well, we're trying to figure this out. What's some advice that you would have? What would be advice to maybe some marketing departments who are trying to grapple with this um, challenge, this kind of grind, I guess, of figuring out what to do in order to appeal to the students, what's maybe a little bit of advice that you would have there?
I mean, we touched on this already, but the first piece of advice would be pick a pony and ride it. So
Okay.
figure out what you want to be and what message you want to put out to help folks, prospective students, the community generally understand who you are as an institution. And don't try to be everything to everyone. It hasn't gone well for the most part for institutions who have tried to do that, unless they're in an area that is just growing like a weed population wise. They're really struggling. So it's figure out what your niche will be, or few areas of strength will be, and flex those muscles and really focus there, and probably leave a few things aside or de-emphasize programs, areas, or a part of a brand identity that used to be important that's not important anymore. And look to good research to inform those decisions. Don't just guess.
That's a good note to end on. Don't just guess. I mean, it shows how important the data and the work is to drive these decisions. Ben, thanks. Thanks for joining and chatting about this. Look forward to future conversation.
Yeah, thank you.